Have you ever noticed how often people confuse certainty with leadership? How quickly some will trade compassion for control or fairness for the illusion of having all the answers? Religious stories have been used this way for centuries, shaping our expectations of what a good leader is supposed to look like. But when you peel back the layers, the real lesson is usually a lot more human and a lot less supernatural than it first appears. Welcome to Mythologizing the Bible, where we'll be taking a look at 3 readings from the Christian Bible through the lens of sacred myth. As we reflect on the readings for the solemnity of our Lord Jesus Christ, King of the universe, we'll explore why genuine leadership isn't about divine certainty, magical authority, or punishing enemies. Real leadership is about protecting people, guiding them with humility, and caring for everyone, not just the loyal few. In this episode, we're asking an honest question. What happens when we strip away the mythological framing and focus on the real-world values hidden underneath? Because if leadership, religious or otherwise, is going to move us toward a healthier society, it's going to look less like a king on a throne and more like someone willing to step forward with integrity, curiosity, accountability, and even forgiveness. So grab a comfy seat, a glass of your favorite beverage, and let's look at some ancient stories together in this edition of Mythologizing the Bible, where we'll be exploring the readings for the solemnity of our Lord Jesus Christ, King of the universe, Cycle C of the Roman Catholic Lectionary. In this series, we're exploring readings from the Bible through the lens of sacred myth, looking for interpretations and lessons that don't demand a belief in the supernatural. What that means, from a practical standpoint, is that we will assume that these stories and writings are fiction, written by pre-scientific people with their own agendas and different audiences. Now, you might agree with the lessons I find, but I encourage you to look for something that rings true to you. Part of the beauty of understanding these writings as sacred myths is that we're free to interpret them for ourselves. We're free to learn the lessons that we need right now. So with that, let's dive in. As I said, tonight we'll be looking at the readings for the solemnity of our Lord Jesus Christ, King of the universe, Cycle C. Our first reading is from 2 Samuel. It's chapter 5, verses 1 through 3. Our second reading is from the letter to the Colossians. It's chapter 1, verses 12 through 20. And our gospel reading is from Luke. It's chapter 23, verses 35 through 43. Now we'll start by going through all 3 of the readings, then we'll look for the messages and the main lesson in each one. Finally, we'll bring everything together, look at what it means for us today, and talk about where we go from here. And with that, let's begin. Our first reading is from 2 Samuel. All the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, "We are your own flesh and blood. In the past, while Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel on their military campaigns. And the Lord said to you, 'You will shepherd my people Israel, and you will become their ruler.' When all the elders of Israel had come to King David at Hebron, the king made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel." Our second reading is from the letter to the Colossians. Brothers and sisters, give joyful thanks to the Father, who has qualified you to share in the inheritance of his holy people in the kingdom of light. For he has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son he loves, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. And our gospel reading is from Luke. The people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at Jesus. They said, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he is God's Messiah, the chosen one." The soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and said, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was a written notice above him which read, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. "Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other criminal rebuked him. "Don't you fear God?" he said, "since you are under the same sentence? We are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve, but this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus answered him, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." All right, so let's go back and take a critical look at these readings and see what learnings and lessons we can find if we dig around just a little bit. So our first reading was from 2 Samuel, and when we hear this short passage about the elders of Israel coming to David, it's easy to imagine a moment of unified civic pride, a whole nation choosing its next leader. But the story intentionally reframes it. The people aren't choosing their leader. They're simply agreeing with God's choice. David is portrayed as divinely appointed, a shepherd placed over the flock. Historically, of course, things weren't quite so tidy. David may have been a capable leader, a shrewd tactician, or even a charismatic local chieftain whose story expanded over generations. But mythologizing him as God's chosen king was a powerful narrative tool, one that gave his authority sort of a sacred glow and basically encouraged people to trust him without question. Now, the shepherd metaphor, that meant something profound to ancient audiences. Shepherds lived among the flock. They guided, protected, and when needed, fought off the wolves. They weren't detached rulers. They were responsible guardians. So if we peel away the supernatural framing, we're left with a deeply human ideal. Leaders should care for those they serve. They should help people navigate danger. They should make wise decisions and ensure the community thrives. Whether or not David actually ruled a vast unified kingdom doesn't change the importance of that image. The point is the value behind that image. Leadership grounded in responsibility, humility, and compassion, just like a shepherd. And this is where the ancient story bumps into our modern reality, because when we apply this old shepherd-king ideal to our current leadership, it exposes some incredibly painful truths. A leader who pursues revenge, who labels fellow citizens as enemies, who calls criticism seditious behavior, who uses power to enrich himself or his family. This is the opposite of the shepherd metaphor. That's not guiding or protecting anyone. That's exploiting a flock for personal gain. Even for those who believe in biblical authority, Christian nationalists and certain evangelicals claiming that our current president is chosen by God stretches this story beyond recognition. If the biblical narrative sets any standard at all, it's that leadership is meant to elevate and safeguard the people, not to dominate or punish them. So the main lesson I got from our first reading is that truly good leaders will guide and protect us. This short little reading invites us to look past the mythological framing and focus on the timeless expectation that's embedded in it. The best leaders serve the people, not themselves. They guide wisely. They protect us consistently, and they build communities that are rooted in trust and fairness. When leaders fail to do this, when they choose vengeance over responsibility or power over compassion, we're right to question their legitimacy. Stories like this one, even when they're wrapped in these ancient supernatural embellishments, still call us toward healthier models of leadership, because in every age, the message stands firm. Truly good leaders will guide and protect us. Our second reading was from the letter to the Colossians. And this passage was likely a hymn when it was originally written, something meant to stir the heart. Yeah, not really the mind. For its original audience, right, people surrounded by fears of unseen spirits and unpredictable powers, this must have felt like a breath of fresh air and some stability. Imagine living in a world where every illness, every misfortune, every shift in the wind was blamed on some invisible, usually evil force. Now imagine hearing that one figure, Jesus, one figure held authority over all of those forces. The King of the universe. That promise of certainty, of control over the unknown. Well, that would have been incredibly appealing to people who had almost no control in their daily lives. But even from the earliest years of Christianity, that certainty was presented as sort of a package deal. Right? Don't try to understand the universe. Just trust us. Don't wrestle with contradictions. Faith will smooth them over. The idea that the creator of a vast cosmos needed to follow cosmic rules that required the torture and death of his son, in order for him to forgive people, that wasn't questioned, right? Questioning wasn't the point. The point was simply relief, emotional relief. People embraced these mysteries dressed up as answers because those answers felt safer than admitting we just don't know. Certainty sells, and it has always sold especially well to the poor, the oppressed, the marginalized, those who are most desperate for something predictable in a chaotic world. And yet, the impulse to fill every gap in our knowledge with a supernatural explanation doesn't actually bring us closer to the truth. In fact, it short-circuits curiosity. It replaces wonder with dogma. The claim that the visible and the invisible realms are held together by Christ can't be tested. That claim can't be measured or it's certainly not falsified. Because of that, it requires people to silence the very human instinct to explore, to ask, to probe deeper. But here's the thing they're missing. Uncertainty isn't a threat. It's a doorway. The overwhelming majority of the most remarkable advances in human life, from science to ethics to personal growth, have all emerged because someone accepted not knowing as the first step toward eventually understanding. Anyway, the main lesson. I got from our second reading is that we don't understand everything, and that's okay. When we read this, it should challenge us to resist the temptation to grab the nearest comforting explanation just because the unknown feels intimidating. Instead of plugging every mystery with an unprovable supernatural claim, we can embrace the far more honest and liberating truth. There is still so much we don't know about the universe, and that's part of what makes life meaningful. Wonder invites discovery. Curiosity fuels growth. Humility keeps us open to learning. We strengthen ourselves, not weaken ourselves. We strengthen ourselves when we admit that we don't have all the answers. Because the fact is, we don't understand everything, and that's okay. All right, our final reading was from the Gospel of Luke. And this gospel passage centers on that mocking sign above Jesus' head, King of the Jews. A political jab more than anything else. Historically, the wording would have been closer to King of the Judeans, because the term Jew, Jewish, Jews, that wasn't even in use back then. Oh, and the charge that he would have faced would have been sedition, not heresy. Rome didn't crucify people for bad theology. They crucified people who threatened Roman order, Roman rule. What's fascinating is that unlike the David story we heard earlier, right, where the people embraced their new king, here the so-called king is rejected, humiliated, and executed. And because his followers had expected a political liberator who would overthrow Rome, his death forced a complete reframing of the story. Essentially a massive religious retcon. Instead of leading Israel to triumph, he was reimagined as conquering death itself. When reality didn't match their expectations, myth filled in the gaps. But beyond the myth-making, there's a quieter thread that's sort of woven into the scene, which is the way Jesus responds to cruelty. The one thing the crowd doesn't expect from a king, mercy, is the one thing he offers. He forgives the criminal beside him. He refuses revenge. He doesn't lash out at the people who are mocking him or condemn the ones who betrayed him. Whether or not this moment reflects a real historical interaction isn't the point. What matters is the value the story tries to elevate. It contrasts raw power with moral power. And it suggests that leadership, real leadership, isn't measured by domination or retribution. Leadership is measured by the ability to hold on to integrity, compassion, and fairness, even when the world is at its worst. And this contrast feels painfully relevant today. We've seen modern leaders who behave like the opposite of this gospel ideal. Leaders who lash out when they're criticized, who label fellow citizens as enemies, who weaponize institutions to punish personal grievances. That's not strength. That's insecurity dressed up as authority. It's everything the gospel's king was not. If there is any enduring humanistic message in this passage, it's that real leadership is not about force or ego. It's about rising above instinctive retaliation and choosing the more difficult path. Empathy instead of spite. Restraint instead of vengeance. Forgiveness instead of childish tantrums. So the main lesson I got from our gospel reading is that forgiving others is the sign of a true leader. stripping away the layers of myth and the theological patchwork, this gospel leaves us with a surprisingly grounded insight. Forgiveness is a form of strength, not weakness. It's a sign of a leader who refuses to become the very thing they oppose. In a world where power is often equated with the ability to punish, well, this story challenges us to redefine what power even means. A true leader builds trust, restores dignity, and chooses compassion, even when cruelty would be so much easier. Forgiving others is the sign of a true leader. All right, let's review the lessons we've talked about so far. In our first reading from 2 Samuel, the main lesson I came away with was truly good leaders will guide and protect us. In our second reading from Colossians, the main lesson I got was we don't understand everything, and that's okay. And finally, the main lesson I got from our gospel reading was forgiving others is the sign of a true leader. When you put all three of these readings side by side, a clear theme rises to the surface. Real leadership isn't about certainty, bravado, or having all the answers. Real leadership is about showing up with humility, protecting people, and guiding them through uncertainty with integrity and compassion. Strip away the mythological layers and you're left with a remarkably human lesson. Leaders don't need supernatural authority or perfect knowledge. They need courage, empathy, fairness, and the willingness to care for everyone, not just their loyalist supporters. And if someone claims to follow the teachings of Jesus while refusing to forgive, refusing to include, and refusing to protect those outside their own circle, they're not modeling leadership. They're modeling insecurity. A great leader isn't afraid of ambiguity. They aren't shaken by disagreement. And they don't use power to punish. They protect broadly, they guide wisely, they stay curious, and they forgive freely. That's the kind of leadership we need today. That's the kind of leadership we should demand. So let's step back and take another look at these readings overall and see if we can figure out what these lessons really mean to us in our daily lives. To do this, I'll try to answer two questions. So what? And now what? Okay, so what? Why should we care about any of this? Well, we should care about this because the United States is running dangerously low on real values-based leadership. What we're seeing from the Trump regime isn't leadership at all. It's a power grab dressed up as patriotism. It's fueled by fear, resentment, and a narrow religious ideology that they want to impose on everybody else. When leaders abandon fairness, compassion, and cooperation, everyday people pay the price. And if we don't recognize that leadership vacuum for what it is, we won't understand why so many institutions feel more and more unstable as we go. This is important because we can't use the old playbook to stop an authoritarian movement that refuses to play by the old rules. Trumpism is basically political Calvin ball. The rules change every few minutes to benefit whoever's holding the ball at the time. And it's almost always the MAGA folks. If we try to respond with outdated assumptions about good faith and shared norms, we will continue to get blindsided. We need new strategies that reflect the reality of what we're facing, not the America we wish we still lived in. We should care about this, though, because while their movement is fueled by cruelty and punishment, we can't let ourselves mirror that behavior. Fighting authoritarianism does not mean becoming authoritarian ourselves. Standing up for fairness and accountability doesn't mean abandoning empathy or letting rage decide our actions. The goal is not to get even. The goal is to restore a society where everyone, not just the most loyal few, everyone is protected and treated with dignity. That requires us to hold the line on our values, even when they don't. This is important because accountability and forgiveness are not opposites. They're partners. Forgiveness doesn't mean letting people off the hook. It means refusing to become like the people we're resisting. We can demand justice, enforce consequences, and call out cruelty without letting bitterness corrode our own integrity. The real challenge and the real opportunity is to stop authoritarianism without becoming vindictive or losing our humanity in the process. That's the kind of leadership the country needs. And it's the kind of leadership we can choose to practice starting right now. And the last question I try to answer is, now what? What are we supposed to do? Where do we go from here? Well, one of the biggest takeaways from this week's conversation is that leadership rooted in fairness, empathy, and real accountability doesn't just happen on its own. It requires people like us pushing our elected officials to practice those values. When authoritarian movements twist the rules, ignore norms, and weaponize power, silence and passivity become part of the problem. But taking one small, concrete action can remind us that we still have influence and that our voices matter far more than we're often led to believe. So with that in mind, here's your challenge for the week. Send a short email to one of your elected officials, local, state, or federal, urging them to practice fairness and accountability in one specific area you care about. Pick an issue connected to what we discussed tonight. Something related to the need for equitable treatment of all people, or resisting authoritarian tactics, safeguarding voting rights, ensuring equal protection under the law, or preventing government power from being used as a tool for revenge. Keep your message brief, respectful, and make it clear. You're not trying to write a dissertation. You're just trying to make your voice heard. Doing things like this matters because contacting an elected official is one of the simplest and most effective ways to remind them who they work for and to remind you that you're not powerless. Even one email pushes the needle a tiny bit toward fairness, integrity, and responsible leadership. A couple weeks ago, I decided to put this into practice myself. I reached out to Michigan's governor, Gretchen Whitmer, because the GOP is threatening to let ACA subsidies expire, a move that could more than double health insurance costs for millions of Americans. But instead of just asking her to fight the Republicans, I asked her to lead in a different way. I wrote that Section 1333 of the ACA already gives states the power to form an interstate public option, a multi-state insurance plan big enough to negotiate better premiums, lower drug costs, and force hospitals to accept reasonable rates. Colorado, on its own, already proved that this is possible with a public option. They saved people an average of $1,200 a year in that state. I told Governor Whitmer that as someone being forced into an early retirement with rising medical expenses, my wife and I would jump at the chance to join a good public option created by a coalition of blue states. And then I asked her to lead, not just by resisting bad policies, but by creating good ones that materially improve people's lives. It felt good to do something concrete, and it reminded me that Leadership grounded in fairness and cooperation is always within reach when people with power choose to use it. The practical benefits of taking this challenge are very real. Taking action reduces feelings of helplessness. It'll build your civic muscles. It strengthens your sense of agency. And it can help you stay grounded instead of feeling overwhelmed. When enough ordinary people take small steps like this, it creates pressure, visibility, and momentum. The exact things that push back against creeping authoritarianism. One email may feel small, but it's a powerful start, and it begins right at your own kitchen table. So this week, send a short email to one of your elected officials, local, state, or federal, urging them to protect fairness and accountability in one specific area that you care about. Well, before I wrap things up, I'd like to leave you with one more thought. South African bishop and theologian Desmond Tutu once said, "Do your little bit of good where you are. It's those little bits of good put together that overwhelm the world." Now, this is a quote that I've used before, but I thought it was very appropriate for today, and I wanted to remind you of it. This quote hits right at the heart of what we've been talking about. Bishop Tutu spent his life confronting systems of cruelty and authoritarianism, yet he always reminded people that you don't fight injustice by becoming unjust yourself. You don't defeat bitterness by embracing bitterness. And you don't wait for someone else to fix the world while you sit back feeling powerless. You do the small, concrete things that are within your reach, and those actions add up. Those actions eventually overwhelm the world. This ties directly into our challenge for the week because we've been wrestling with how to push back against leaders who model cruelty, revenge, and insecurity, but push back without sinking to their level. Bishop Tutu's wisdom helps us remember that meaningful change doesn't come from grand displays of certainty or chest-thumping bravado. It comes from ordinary people doing small acts that are rooted in compassion, fairness, and cooperation, the very values that authoritarian movements are trying so hard to erode. When we take actions like contacting elected officials, holding bad actors accountable without becoming vindictive, or choosing empathy over rage, we're doing our little bit of good. And when enough people do that, it becomes the kind of collective leadership that actually protects people and pushes society in a healthier direction. Bishop Tutu reminds us that leadership isn't about knowing everything. It's about consistently choosing the good that's within your power to do. All right, we've come to the end of this episode. Thanks for joining me. I'll be back again next week. But in the meantime, I encourage you to engage with our challenge for the week. And pay attention to the important lessons you come across wherever you find them. You'll create a more purposeful and joyful life, and you'll start to feel more connected to the world and the people around you. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Mythologizing the Bible as we did a deeper dive into the readings for the Solemnity of our Lord Jesus Christ, King of the Universe, Cycle C of the Roman Catholic Lectionary. Remember that truly great leaders protect broadly, guide wisely, stay curious, and forgive freely. The Bible readings used for this episode are from the Holy Bible New International Version, NIV, copyright 1973, 1978, 1984, and 2011 by Biblica Inc., used by permission, all rights reserved worldwide. Thank you for listening. If you like this content, please consider telling a friend about it. The more people who hear the positive messages I'm sharing, the better. Mythologizing the Bible is a live-streamed series held most Thursdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on twitch.tv/thecodaproject. Every week, the audio of these Mythologizing the Bible presentations is released as a podcast. You can find the podcast at thecodaproject.com or on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Pocket Casts. To learn more, to subscribe to my mailing list, and to keep up on everything I'm doing with the Coda Project, please visit thecodaproject.com.